Hey folks, and welcome to another GPU benchmark. Now, this is a GPU that I had no intention of benchmarking, I had no intention of buying it. But it was one of those that you're sitting on eBay, all of a sudden something comes up that looks too good to be true, and before you know it, you've put in an offer and you've won it. So what we've got here is a GTX 970 from MSI. And it was picked up on eBay like I've says, and after using one of those free eBay £15 off vouchers, I managed to snag this card for £125. Now it kind of got me thinking, so much people when they're talking about the GTX 1050 Ti that I've featured quite a lot on this channel, go with the automatic assumption of, oh, you should just go for a RX 470, it's 30% more expensive, but you get 50% more performance. But I was really intrigued to see how this card, the GTX 970, would stack up against the 1050 Ti. Now I have got a fair idea in my head that it's going to pretty much blow it away, considering that I've benchmarked the 1050 Ti against its older sibling, the GTX 770. But when it costs pretty much exactly the same as I paid for my GTX 1050 Ti, it's going to be an interesting comparison. So we're going to cover this card in a lot more detail in a future video, but for this quick test, we're going to boot it up in Crysis 3. And this is still running on the Ryzen rig, so that's a Ryzen 7 1700 with 8GB of DDR4 Corsair memory, no overclocking in play, and the GTX 970 is also keeping it at stock clock, simply because on the last test we used for the Ryzen rig, the GTX 1050 was also kept at stock clocks. So for the settings, we're going to use the same settings as a GTX 1050 Ti would be comfortable with to give us a good comparison, and that's going to be 1920 by 1080 on the high preset with 2x SMAA and 16x anisotropic filtering. So for those of you that's not watched the Ryzen video yet, in Crysis 3, the GTX 1050 Ti returned an average frame rate 69 FPS with minimums of 55. And the GTX 970, well, it absolutely blew it out of the water. The average frame rate on this was 108 FPS. Now that's just under 160% of what the GTX 1050 Ti achieved. And as you can imagine, at this kind of frame rates, the gameplay is silky smooth. Now I've only got a 60Hz monitor, so the fact that it can run at 110 frames per second on average, it pretty much means nothing to me. So when I do a full test of this GPU, we're going to be cranking the settings up as high as they go and seeing how it can fare. But folks, I just want to throw this into the mixer there. If you're considering a GTX 1050 Ti, and you've got a PSU that can handle something a bit more, then you'd be absolutely crazy not to look in the used market. I've said it before many times, like if you want to go cheaper, there's stuff like the R9 280X or a GTX 770. But if you're wanting to spend that 130 or so pounds, then at this point in time, something like the GTX 970, it offers so much performance for so little money. But anyway folks, thanks so much for tuning in for this really quick look at Crysis 3 on the GTX 970. Stay tuned, we're going to be benchmarking this GPU in the Ryzen setup and also the Core i5 setup very soon. So again, thanks for watching. Use those thumbs to tell me what you thought of it, and you can leave a comment down in the description below, and you can tell me what kind of content you'd like to see in the future. But for now, take care, and I'll see you all soon.